And we're live. We're live.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the September 13th, 2023 meeting of the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee of the University of Rhode Island Board of Trustees. The meeting is being held in person with committee members participating remotely. At this time, I will conduct a roll call attendance to determine if a quorum is present. Please clearly respond present via WebEx or present in person when your name is called. Robbie Luna, present via WebEx. Matthew Lenz.
Present via WebEx.
Joseph Fornicola.
Present via WebEx.
Richard Humphrey. Riva Goyal.
Present via WebEx.
David Caprio. Michael Gray. Mark Parlance.
Present via WebEx.
And Board Chair Margot Cook is also present and participating as an invited guest. We have a quorum is present. I'll call the meeting to order. And just a reminder to all members, for the benefit of our audience and the note taker, please clearly identify yourself whenever you comment, make a motion or a second to a motion. Participants using WebEx are required to keep their cameras on as remote members, and all persons present at the meeting location must be clearly audible and visible to each other. At this time, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional homeland of the Narragansett Nation and the Niantic people. The first order of business is approval of the minutes for June 26, 2023, the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee meeting, enclosure 1A. May I have the motion that the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee approve the minutes of June 26, 2023 committee meeting?
Matt Lenz, so moved.
Is there a second to the motion?
Joe Formicola, second.
Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. The next item on the agenda is item 2, discussion items. We have 2 of them today. The first one is fiscal year 2023 external audit update. I'll ask Abby Benson and Michael Johns to please brief this item.
Great. Thanks, Robbie. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here today. And I'm also pleased that we have Mike Johns from CLA, our external auditing firm, that's here to give an update on our external audit per our committee calendar. I also want to point out Angela Miller, our AVP for Financial Operations, is also on the call. She's our campus controller, and she's been working with Mike and his team on the audit. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike for a brief update.
Good afternoon, everyone. So to work backwards with the audit timeline, the final financial statements signed with an audit opinion from CLA are due to the state at the end of this month. In 2 days, on 9/15, we owe a final draft to the state for their review and comment. And that's where we are right now. So we're in the process of finalizing that draft, reviewing that draft. Management has prepared that draft and sent it over to CLA for review. So I will provide any comments I have tomorrow, early Friday, and then we will have that draft financial statement submitted to the state for them to review on time. No issues. At that point, it will go into our quality review process. And once we get comments back from the state and our quality control personnel, then we'll be ready to issue the financial statements. We're working through a few remaining open items. There was a significant standard that needed to be adopted this year. It's called subscription-based information technology arrangements. I like that standard because you get to say SBITA. It's a fun word. It's a little levity. But anyway, what that statement requires is any contract the university has for software where they have to pay what's defined as subscription payments. In the past, that was just expensed. And now the new standard requires it to be an intangible asset on the university's statement and net position or balance sheet with a corresponding liability, which would represent the amounts due to the third parties over the term of the contract. So there were a lot of contracts the university finance team had to go through and analyze, and we're wrapping up that testing and analysis for the draft that is due this Friday. I don't have any significant audit matters to update governance with at this time. And once the audit's complete and submit it, I believe we're on the calendar to do a final report out. We'll go over the financial statements and our required communications as external auditors. That was a brief status of where we are, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Yeah, this is Amin Sabatoni. Explain the process on how it gets to the state, what department, and what are they looking at?
The process is they ask for what they call a final draft. So basically, it's your financial statements without an audit opinion that have gone through CLA's review. It goes to both the state auditor and the state finance department. The reason they want to look at it is because the university is included in their financial statements as what's called a component unit. So they just want to make sure that everything, I'll call it a sniff test, looks okay compared to what they have on their records and what they need to disclose in their annual financial report. So last year, I don't believe they had significant comments, maybe a few questions just to resolve, but they just want that opportunity to take a look before the audit goes final, just in case there are any changes that would need to be made to get the state and the university in conformity for reporting in their financial statements.
Okay, appreciate it.
Any additional questions? Before we move on to the next discussion item, I do have one go back. I just wanted to let the record show that Armin Sabatoni is also present and participating as an invited guest. The next discussion item is the compliance review, affirmative action and employment overview, enclosure 2B. If we could have Abby Benson, Carol Larson, and Dorka Paulino Smiley present that item, please.
Great, thank you. So this is a discussion item around our affirmative action in employment program. And I say in employment because I know there's been a lot of information in the news recently about affirmative action in race admissions, and the university obviously is looking at that and exploring the impact of this in the university. But this really is about affirmative action in employment. We have state and federal reporting standards, and we intend to bring our state affirmative action report to the committee later this year, and thought it would be useful to give you an overview of our Office of Equal Opportunity that helps manage the affirmative action program on behalf of URI. So I want to introduce our AVP for Enterprise Risk Management, Carol Larson, who oversees the Office of Equal Opportunity and a number of other critical areas at the university. And she will introduce Dorka Paulino Smiley, who runs the Office of Equal Opportunity, who will give the presentation. So Carol, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, I just wanted to introduce the committee and the other attendees to Dorka Paulino Smiley, who is the director of the Office of Equal Opportunity. She joined us a year ago in August of 2022 from the Rhode Island State Supreme Court, where she was the director of diversity for 5 years. And she did equal employment and affirmative action compliance there. She this is her first affirmative action plan that she's creating for the university. It's not our first one, but it's the first one that she's doing. And she's done a lot of work to really improve the processes and the data. But so what we're going to do is have her present sort of an overview, a kind of introduction to affirmative action here at the university. And then at probably the next meeting or soon thereafter, we will bring the actual affirmative action plan, our state plan, to the committee and provide a presentation on the specifics of the plan. So I will turn it over to Dorka, who will share her screen and provide a presentation.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you, Kara, for the introduction. So I am going to proceed by sharing the screen and starting the presentation. For a second. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can see.
Fantastic. So it is an honor to join you today to facilitate this presentation on the topic of Introduction to Affirmative Action in Employment Compliance. I have been completing affirmative action plans for the last 7 years and was very excited to take a deep dive into our affirmative action program and plan. So let's start by going over the agenda. Today, we will introduce you to the function of the Office of Equal Opportunity. I have
Okay, just so you know, it didn't advance to agenda, so
Okay,
not sure if it's possible just to advance down a slide.
can you see the agenda slide now?
Not yet.
Interesting. I can see it. Can you see it now? There may be a glitch. I can see it on my screen, so bear with me for 1 second, and I will reshare once again. Okay, let's share that screen one more time. Like this.
Looks like you're on the third slide now, so we can see it.
Back to the agenda. Can you see it now?
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So today we will introduce you to the function of the Office of Equal Opportunity, which I have the distinct honor of leading. We're going to answer the question, what is affirmative action in employment? What is an affirmative action plan? Moving beyond affirmative action compliance, and I will take your questions at the end. So what is the function of the Office of Equal Opportunity? Introduced in July of 2022, with the function of leading and directing the university's civil rights compliance programs, with an emphasis on Title VI, which prohibits discrimination in service delivery, Title VII, which prohibits discrimination in employment, Title IX, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Equal Opportunity, and Affirmative Action in Employment. We are tasked with investigating and addressing complaints of harassment, discrimination, and hostile work environment in service delivery and employment. That means that we serve students and employees. We also provide employee training and counseling sessions and civil rights topics. And we're working closely with the Human Resource Administration on several training topics at this time. We also conduct our civil rights compliance reviews and serve as liaison between state and federal civil rights enforcement agencies and the university. And we identify areas of underutilization in the workforce and work with the leadership to develop strategies to increase representation in the workforce, which ties into the President's strategic plan. So this affirmative action presentation will introduce you to our program and the steps that we are taking to create a workforce that represents the communities we serve. So what is affirmative action in employment? Affirmative action is defined by the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, also known as OFCCP, as the obligation on the part of the contractor. In this case, the University of Rhode Island is the contractor. In some cases, we are a subcontractor. The same rules apply. It's the obligation on the part of the contractor to take action to ensure that applicants are employed and that employees are treated fairly during employment. It doesn't end during the application process, and it doesn't only cover applicants. Affirmative action expands to offer protections to employees so that they're treated without regard to their protected status. So without regard to their race, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, disability, or status as a protected veteran. Per Executive Order 10925, the affirmative action obligation reaches all terms and conditions and privileges of employment, including recruitment, promotion, termination, and compensation. Affirmative action ensures equal opportunity in all aspects of employment. For the OFCCP, the purpose of affirmative action is to ensure equal employment opportunities for applicants and employees. It is based on the premise that absent discrimination over time, the University of Rhode Island's workforce will generally reflect the demographics of the qualified available workforce in the relevant job market. Affirmative action requirements are intended to ensure that applicants and employees of federal contractors have equal opportunity for recruitment, selection, advancement, and every other term and privilege associated with employment without regard to their protected status. We speak about affirmative action in employment often, and affirmative action in service delivery, and we're going to define that for you. Affirmative action also expands beyond employment activities to include service delivery. Under Title VI, entities such as the University of Rhode Island must promote affirmative action in service delivery. And these are some examples. Conduct an outreach to ensure that members of the public, regardless of protected status, are aware of the affirmative action program, employment opportunities, and or services funded by the University of Rhode Island by federal grants. For example, in the last 5 fiscal years, 81% of the grants the University of Rhode Island received were federally funded, which makes it subject to affirmative action compliance and service delivery. That means that we must make the public aware of the programs funded by those grants and also promote access. That also includes diversifying boards, advisory groups, and committees to ensure that members are representative of the communities a federally funded program or services serve. So if you have a grant that is targeting members of the Rhode Island population, in some cases, we have to conduct an underutilization analysis for that specific program, describing the demographic composition of the committees or boards, if they have any, or the staff, administering the program and how they compare the people being served in the Rhode Island population. Affirmative action and service delivery also includes posting all positions for employment, volunteer roles, or opportunities to serve on boards, advisory groups, or committees. Compliance with principles of affirmative action in hiring and recruitment when filling roles that are funded by federal funds. It is not limited to outreach and employment activities, but also expands to include affirmative action admissions and contracts. For example, the Minority Business Enterprise or Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, or the Women's Business Enterprise program that is managed in collaboration with the Rhode Island State Minority Business Enterprise Office. That means that a percentage of our contracts must be awarded to organizations that are registered with the state. But what is an affirmative action program? As it relates specifically to employment, because that is what brings us here today. Per Executive Order number 11246, an affirmative action program consists of positive steps taken by an employer, which contributes toward equal opportunities in employment for all, and greater employment opportunities for minorities, females, the elderly, and the disabled. And that is the specific language the executive order uses. Institutions that receive federal funds, such as the University of Rhode Island, must make efforts to include qualified women, minorities, employees over 40, and the disabled in job categories where they are underrepresented. The Office of Equal Opportunity leads URI's affirmative action program. What is an affirmative action plan? An affirmative action plan is a tool, is a written program in which an employer details the steps it has taken and will continue to take to ensure the right of all persons to advance on the basis of merit and ability without regard to their protected status. Affirmative action plans and programs are required by state and federal law. For Rhode Island general law, all public agencies, with the exception of the legislature, must submit an affirmative action plan each year. For the OFCCP, federal contractors and subcontractors must complete and maintain an affirmative action plan as part of their compliance efforts. So each year we complete 2 plans, the state plan and the federal plan. The University of Rhode Island's affirmative action plan is being developed following guidance from the United States Department of Labor, OFCCP division, and also in accordance with Rhode Island general laws and other applicable local, state, federal laws and regulations. The fiscal year 23 report is delayed due to significant internal effort to improve on the data integrity and reporting. The report will be submitted to the State of Rhode Island Division of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion in September, and it will be shared with the Board of Trustees in November. The plan will cover all employment activities for fiscal year 22, reporting period July 1st, 2021 to June 30, 2022. And then it will outline action goals that we took the following fiscal year. So you will notice you will have 2 different reporting periods. So reporting workforce and applicant data, I would like to thank the divisions that have made it possible for us to be able to complete the affirmative action plan. The Human Resource Administration has been an incredible partner, and they collect and store applicant and workforce data. By workforce data, I mean demographic information for new hires, any employees we promoted, terminations, transfers, and existing staff. And you will see this information in detail under utilization analysis of the affirmative action plan. Our role in this process is to report the workforce data and the applicant data and to audit the data annually to promote accuracy and to ensure compliance with state and federal regulations. The Office of Institutional Research has been an incredible partner. They support the work of the Office of Equal Opportunity and the Human Resource Administration by completing the drug group analysis charts. This is where we report our workforce composition. And they organize some of the data sets that the Office of Equal Opportunity uses to audit, develop, and complete some of the other charts that we have to report, which the state provides to us. Why do we complete a plan? I mean, we complete it because we have to comply, but our goal is not simply to comply. We want to move beyond compliance. The goal of an affirmative action plan is to ensure that all applicants are treated fairly and given equal opportunity to compete for employment. As a covered entity, the University of Rhode Island must comply with various civil rights, federal, state, and local laws and regulations. Affirmative actions are often introduced to ensure that organizations are compliant with civil rights laws by actively working to reduce disparities and promote equal opportunity in employment. However, the goal is not simply to comply, and it ties into strategic priority number 3 outlined by the President's strategic plan. Goal number 2 is to build an innovative, contemporary, and professional learning environment in workplace that values and advances diversity, equity, and inclusion, and accessibility, with leadership that is principle-centered and effective. Goal number 3 is to attract, recognize, and retain outstanding faculty and staff. So the steps that we outline in our affirmative action plan and program to attract and retain a diverse workforce matter. And we're really excited to come back in November and conduct a presentation and answer any questions that you may have about the program that is being developed. If you have any questions at any point, you may contact either of the individuals listed on this slide. Carol Larson, as you know, is the Assistant Vice President. The Office of Equal Opportunity reports to. You may also reach out to me. And at this time, I will take your questions.
So I had a question. So it's no secret that affirmative action programs across the country are under attack. And recently, in July, a federal judge in Tennessee essentially struck down a provision in a federal program that equated race with social disadvantage and determining whether or not minority-owned businesses could qualify for federal contracts. But based on what you've described today, I guess the state of Rhode Island still has some provisions that look at race as a determining factor to qualify for any sort of economic empowerment or state contract. And I feel it's only a matter of time before it trickles its way down to the state level. How is the university or the affirmative action program in your office looking at preparing for some of these challenges?
Thank you for asking that question, Robin. So the state of Rhode Island does have provisions, and we work closely with the Rhode Island Department of Administration to manage the Minority Business Enterprise Program in collaboration with them. The affirmative action plan that you will receive in November will be specifically about affirmative action in employment. So we have not taken a deep dive into that topic just yet. At this time, I find it unlikely that we are going to make any changes to our existing program, and I would defer to our legal team for their legal analysis, but I don't have a reason to believe that we're at risk.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just add that we work in close partnership with the state around purchasing and procurement more broadly. And obviously this remains, as Dorcas said, a priority for the state of Rhode Island. So we view ourselves as close partners with them and making sure that we're helping them meet their goals and that we have collaborative understanding of what the mutual goals are. So it's very much on our mind.
And from, I know that we do get federal funding for some of our programs at the university. What exposure do we have to any sort of unfavorable decisions on federal funding because we have affirmative action programs that aren't in compliance with anything that's considered the law of the land as it pertains to affirmative action stances with this current administration or this current Supreme Court?
So I'll also defer to our legal counsel if they want to respond, but I will say that we take this very seriously as we are recipients of significant federal funding and also financial aid funding. So the president has to certify that we're in compliance with these laws, and it's something that's why we have these offices and these frameworks in place. So we would really cease to function effectively without the ability to have that federal support. So I don't know. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Alyssa, if you have anything else to add, but.
As yet, there isn't a federal decision that's contrary to, the affirmative action program that the state and we have in place. We are aware that there are political forces and there is a sort of an apparent agenda within the current Supreme Court to be looking with greater scrutiny at programs like this. So we'd be prepared to, look at and respond to and evaluate and address any decisions that start coming forward to the Supreme Court in the next session, if that should happen.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
Just to note, those are good questions, Robbie. I mean, it's such a sensitive and difficult topic, and we're lucky we live in Rhode Island, but we can't use that as our armor. We have to be prepared.
Yeah. It's I ask these questions because I'm seeing how some of it is playing out in different states across the country that have more of a federal exposure as it pertains to contracting and grants for universities, et cetera.
Right.
So it's now is a good time to start ideating on how we can prepare for some of those outcomes and what what the workarounds will be.
Yep, I agree.
I'll also add, if it's useful, that this is on the radar of our government relations team to keep track of developments at the state and federal level. And also myself and many members of the team participate in national trade organizations like the National Association of College and University Business Officers or College and University Attorneys. And really a goal of participating in those organizations is to really get a sense of what our peers are doing and what the landscape is in other states. And those venues and discussions are really helpful for us as we think about what might come down the pike in Rhode Island. So we value that professional development work as it helps us be prepared for things happening elsewhere.
Yeah, I know we only have an hour and a half, but I think now is a good time to, well, perhaps to start thinking about, if you're familiar with the Federalist Society and how they've been kind of coercing this for the longest time and to get some of these outcomes. I think what we're going to have to start looking at the long game, because this isn't going to be a battle that we're going to win overnight, right? So just a thought.
Thank you so much.
The next item on the agenda, did anyone have anything else to add before I move on? No. Okay. The next item on the agenda is item 3. It's an action item. 3A, review a recommendation that the URI Board of Trustees approves the full resolution set forth in the enclosure through which the board, in summary, is approving the establishment and registration of a branch and or the appropriate model under the laws of the Republic of Madagascar in the name of the University of Rhode Island or such other appropriate name, and authorizes the president of the University of Rhode Island, Dr. Mark Parlange, or his designees to undertake the execution and submission of all documents, instruments, applications, authorizations, and designations that may be required by the applicable governmental authorities and agencies in the Republic of Madagascar, and to take any and all other actions necessary and or appropriate for the establishment, the registration, and operations of a branch and or other appropriate operational model under the laws of the Republic of Madagascar, and for the efficient and effective conduct of the USAID Resilient, Inclusive Abundance and Key Ecosystems, RIAC, Madagascar program, under the leadership and direction of the university's Coastal Resources Center. I'll ask Dr. Ellen Toro, Director of International Coastal Program in URI's Coastal Resource Center, to apply.
Robbie, this is Bethany Jenkins, who's a guest, and Elin, are you here, or Lisa, are you presenting on behalf of the Coastal Resources Center?
No, we're in the room here.
Great. Okay, super. Thanks, Elin.
Thank you. So we're sharing our screen right now. So thanks for having us here today. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the Coastal Resources Center, if you move to next. So some of you may have already heard this little spiel before. Last time we were here in front of this committee, that time for our program in Fiji. But the Coastal Resources Center is proudly housed within the Graduate School of Oceanography. It is a group of about 25 staff, technical and admin, and we implement coastal and marine research and extension programs in Rhode Island and abroad. So our work focuses on 3 areas: sustainable seafood, capable and resilient communities, and healthy, well-planned coasts. In Rhode Island, we do a lot of work related to the blue economy, offshore renewable energy, resilience, and agriculture. And our international programs, they focus on coastal management, fisheries, climate resilience, and food security. Next. So the international portfolio within the Coastal Resources Center is the largest group within CRC. We have an annual budget of about $8 to $12 million that we get in grant funding. And most of our programs are funded by the United States Agency for International Development, where we get pretty large grants. And over the years, it's fluctuated. We've had a lot of work in Africa. Recently, it's made more Asia Pacific, and now we're excited to come back to get a big grant for Africa again in Madagascar. So next, please. So when we get these big programs, and they range from maybe $10 million to, I think our program in the Philippines is now up to $33 million. It requires us to establish presence in country where the grant will be implemented. So in the past, 20 years ago, when I started working at CRC, it was quite easy. We partnered with the USAID and the local government or the national government of the place where we worked, and we were able to establish ourselves as a project, but in the last few years, due to sort of global guidelines, it's become much more strict. So in the last two projects we established, Philippines, where we have the Fish Rights Program, and then Pacific Fish Our Future, we've established URI branch offices. So I spoke in front of this committee about a year and a half ago when we had very similar resolution for the setup in Fiji. Next, please. So next I'm going to tell you a little bit about this exciting new program, the USA Riake Madagascar program. So Riake means sea in Malagasy, but our acronym is Resilient, Inclusive, Abundance in Key Ecosystems. Next. So we're super excited to be working in Madagascar because it's such a major biodiversity hotspot, not only for the terrestrial, but also marine ecosystems with coral reefs, mangroves, beautiful fishing, and so forth. Next. The Riake program is estimated to start in November. We are currently what is called the apparently successful applicant, which means that USAID has selected us as the winner. And we've engaged already for 6 months in a co-creation process with USAID. And it's going to be a 5-year, $13 million program, which may increase if we add funding from the USAID food security earmark. So we have 2 big international partners, Blue Ventures and the Wildlife Conservation Society, and 3 local partners. And we will be focusing on marine biodiversity conservation and human well-being. Next. I'm not going to tell you in detail about the project goals and strategic areas, but again, we will work on both improving sustainable management of the natural resources, that mangroves and coral reefs and fisheries ecosystems. We'll be improving the life of the people who live in our communities by promoting sustainable and diversified livelihoods. We'll work to strengthen governmental systems, strengthening local resilience to climate and other shocks, and work on marine tenure. Next. So by establishing a presence in Madagascar, we're planning on opening a project office in Antananarivo, which is the capital of Madagascar. And as you can see on the blue little star on the map in the middle of the country, it's nowhere close to the coast, but it is where our funding agency, USAID, is, and also most of the national government offices. So it's the strategic place to have the office. Then we will have a presence in 4 field sites that are the red stars on the map, and those will be run through our local partners or other USAID projects. Those would not be URI offices. And in the end of the day, we hope that we will be sustainably managing over 5.5 million hectares of marine areas and benefit about 210,000 people. So that sums it up. It's an exciting program. Next. So I think this is just a resolution for consideration again, and I'm going to turn it over to Vinita, our outside counsel, who's an expert in these matters. So I hope, Vinita, you can hear us now.
She was using audio through her phone.
We hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is better. Yes, like I said, I've been having a lot of audio issues. I'm just waiting for my slides to get loaded. As Elin said, I'm Vinita Mehra. I am a partner at the law firm of Kegler Brown. I work as an outside counsel for University of Rhode Island, assisting them on a lot of their international operations and legal issues. If some of you all were on this committee, I did appear before you all when we were doing the Fiji project and did a similar kind of a risk analysis for the risk committee. As Elin mentioned that, we're looking at setting up a project office in Madagascar. As a part of that process, we are, from a legal perspective, we are looking at several options that University of Rhode Island could have to fulfill their requirements under the USAID grant. And we're looking at entity options, and we're also looking at non-entity options, which we mention as operational options. Next slide, please. So when we look at the entity options under the Malagasy legislation in regard to non-profit structures, any person or entity who are wishing to carry out activities in Madagascar for the purpose of pursuing objectives other than profit sharing objectives are permitted to create very limited type of entities. And the three that we have been looking at, one is a branch. You did hear from Eileen that in Fiji and Philippines, we do have a branch structure, so we're very comfortable and used to that structure. Madagascar also has a branch structure. It's also, because it's a French-speaking country, it's called an accord D. I hope I pronounced that right. It also has the option of a foreign non-governmental organization, or an NGO as they call it, or an association. Next slide. Now, when we look at a branch in Madagascar can be formed for commercial purposes, but it can also be formed for charitable purposes. And that's the purpose that we would fall under, URI would fall under. A branch of a foreign non-profit can operate in Madagascar under what we call an accord D siege. It is basically an agreement by which a foreign entity is authorized by the government, the local government, to carry out activities without having to set up a local structure. The key here is that the Accord D siege is not subject to any regulation. So there are no written rules or regulations as to a formation of a branch. What really depends upon is the agreement that's entered into with the government will have the terms and conditions that would need to be followed as a branch if that is set up. And approval is needed of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the approval is at the complete discretion of the ministry. And it can take up to 6 months to get a branch incorporated and put in place. The key here is that an Accord D siege is strictly reserved for what we call a foreign NGO, a foreign non-governmental organization, which can demonstrate a minimum of 2 years in existence. And the emphasis I'm putting here is a foreign NGO. Based upon the preliminary analysis that we are undertaking and in conjunction with our local council that we have in Madagascar, we believe that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is in charge of getting us the approvals, will likely take the position that URI is not an NGO on the grounds that URI is a state public university and therefore a government entity or an organization. So there may be an issue falling within the definition of an NGO because it's a state public university. We are continuing to evaluate this proposition and looking at other options with USAID and the Malagasy ministries, the appropriate ministries, to see what will be the real interpretation of a not-for-profit or a non-governmental organization for the purposes of setting up a branch. We are also exploring other options, such as using another URI entity, like another non-for-profit 501c3, to try to see if there's some way to get past through this NGO test that we may have to be able to set up a branch. Moving on, next slide. Now, for those who had attended presentations for the Philippines and the Fiji, in terms of a legal status, a branch is not a separate legal entity. It's actually a direct extension of a parent company. And because it's a direct extension of a parent company with respect to liability, the parent company owns 100% of liability of the branch, leading to exposures overseas as to fulfill any local liabilities. So basically, there's no limitation of liability because a branch is just an extension, it's not a separate legal entity. Next slide. The second option or entity option we have been considering is what we call to operate and register as a foreign non-governmental organization, a foreign NGO in Madagascar, which also means a foreign not-for-profit in Madagascar. as a foreign NGO, operating as a foreign NGO, it's considered a separate entity for charitable or non-profit purposes. It requires a minimum of 2 individuals or 2 entities for formation of a foreign NGO. And it also requires prior approval from the Ministry of Interior with consultation of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So there are 2 ministries involved in that approval. And because of, the governmental agencies being involved, it could take up to 1 year for its creation. Next. In terms of a legal status, a foreign NGO may operate as a separate legal entity.
Anita, I think we lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. Like I said, there are audio issues. As I was saying, a foreign NGO may operate as a separate legal entity. It can be sued or be sued in its own name, as its own property, or conduct business in its own name. It's very different from a branch. It's not an extension. It's a separate legal entity. In terms of liability, members of the NGO, the 2 entities that set up the NGO, are shielded from liabilities resulting from the NGO's operation. Next slide. The third option we looked at, or we are looking at, is an association. And again, just like a foreign NGO, an association is a separate entity for charitable and non-profit purpose. It requires a minimum of 2 individual members for formation. We do not have clarity as to, do the members have to be individual or can they be legal entities? Such as there's lack of transparency and clarity into the regulations, we believe that legal entities may not be members of an association, so you would need 2 individuals to set up an association in Madagascar. It also requires prior approval of the government. Because the government is involved and it's an approval process, it can take up to 1 year for creation. Because we don't have clarity into whether legal entities can set up an association, we are not pursuing too much this option. So we won't discuss in detail. If we ever get back to this option, we'll definitely come back to the committee. Next slide. Again, we can just skip this slide as we know that this option may not be possible. Now, when we had looked at, when we are looking at these entity options, excluding the branch, because a branch is just an extension of URI, it's not a separate legal entity. There are 2 other options that we discussed, a foreign NGO and an association. It appears that there are certain restrictions on a formation of a separate legal entity in a foreign country. Upon a plain read of the Rhode Island General Laws, which is 1632(2), it appears that the URI Board of Trustees is not empowered in its enabling legislation to form a separate legal subsidiary or affiliated entity, and is further forbidden to do so by a separate state law relating to public corporations in Rhode Island. That separate state law is referred to as the Rhode Island Public Corporation Financial Integrity and Accountability Act of 1995. Section 7A of that act clearly provides that except as expressly authorized by law, no public corporation shall have the right to exercise or perform any of its powers and functions through any subsidiary or any other separate corporate or entity. Except as expressly authorized by law, no public corporation shall directly require or permit any of its directors, officers, or employees to create any subsidiary or organization. When we read these laws, it looks like, based upon this general rule, we haven't come across any practice or precedent that supports the conclusion that a public corporation like a BOT, the Board of Trustees, have the inherent authority to create affiliated entities or subsidiary corporation. And therefore, because of these limitations, we may have to look and think out of the box. If we can't set up a branch, and if we can't set up a foreign entity, a legal separate entity, then what are the other options to explore to undertake and fulfill the USAID grant objectives? Next slide. Like I mentioned, based upon these restrictions that we have looked into, which may prohibit you setting up a separate entity in a foreign country, We're also looking at what we call operational models, and that can be in form of a contractual partnership or a sub-award arrangement. In Madagascar, subject to the Ministry of Interior's inputs, partnership agreements or arrangements are recognized by the Madagascar government, but they are generally take up the forms or the structure of these two, as we have noted in this chart. One form or structure is contractual partnership between a foreign nonprofit, such as a URI, and a Malagasy public entity, can be any local ministry, under the terms of which the parties agree to collaborate jointly for implementation of a project which is financed by the foreign entity. Or this operational model can look like a contractual partnership, but this partnership we have to put in place pursuant to the uniform guidance which apply to contracts that URI have, and also rules and guidance under the USAID grant as it applies to limitation on the percentage of services that can be sub-awarded. You know, the USAID grant, and the PRC team can talk more about what those limitations or percentage of those services are that can be sub-awarded. In this structure can be between a foreign non-profit like URI and the non-profit organization in Madagascar, an NGO, under which the foreign entity like URI undertakes to finance a project which is then implemented by the local entity, the local NGO. The foreign entity like URI contributes its expertise to assist the NGO in carrying out the said project. But the bottom line in the structure is all project-related activities, or majority of the project-related activities, are carried out by the Malagasy NGO, the local entity, on behalf of the foreign entity. So these are the two operational models that are recognized by the Madagascar government, and we've seen in some cases also with some other universities who have put in place such collaborations for the purposes of their operations in that country. Next slide. So we have spent some time talking to you all about the entity options that we are exploring, also told you all about the operational models that we are exploring within the context of the law that we have to follow in Madagascar. I thought it will be of helpful to the committee to understand certain key metrics and rankings in doing business in Madagascar, in being involved in doing business in Madagascar. The first ranking is the Corruption Perception Index. It's actually a ranking which is given by the Transparency International corporation or organization. This Transparency International organization has an index which offers an annual snapshot of relative degree of corruption by ranking countries. Madagascar is ranked 142 out of 180. So actually, it's not that, you know, the higher the number, the better it is. Actually, a ranking, the higher the numerical value, it actually means a red flag, or it seems like a bad sign that that country is more conducive to corruption. And please, Madagascar is not the only country which is in that range. You know, if you go and check on the Transparency Index, you see there are multiple countries which fall under these rankings. Another report is by the World Bank Doing Business report. Again, in this, a row ranking actually means that the ease of doing business in that country is difficult. It means that the regulatory environment is not conducive to starting or operating a local entity in that country. Madagascar is ranked 161 out of 190 countries. That means, like I said, a low ranking is not a good sign. Similarly, there's another index which we look at when we have people doing international operations. It's called the Global Innovation Index. Madagascar is ranked 106 out of 132. The Global Innovation Index, or the GII as we refer to it, it actually ranks and assists countries which are comparatively more innovative and enforce protection of such innovation and intellectual property rights, which means if there are low rankings, then there is red flags in terms of protection of IP rights, and it means that the IP rights are uneven, or there is lack of resources, or there's weakness in the judicial system, or there's just general lack of awareness of IP rights. And that's what the GII looks like. An important metric to understand is French civil law governs Madagascar's legal code. unlike what we saw in Philippines and Fiji, where common law governed the legal code, in Madagascar, it's the French civil law that governs the Madagascar legal code. And sometimes, because we're looking at a French-based legal system, it works very differently from a common law system. But nothing out of the ordinary. There's a lot of countries which follow civil laws instead of common law, and still the work and the legal enforcement takes place in those countries very efficiently. Next slide. As I mentioned, and I think Elin also mentioned that in recent times, CRC has done projects, similar projects, USAID grant projects in Fiji and Philippines. We thought it would be of help to this committee to do some kind of a comparative analysis between Fiji, Philippines, where the grant work is already undergoing, and Madagascar. The first point that we look at is entity auction. In Fiji and Philippines, it was very easily available, and for URI to go set up a branch, it didn't require any approvals. There was no limitations or restrictions of being a non-governmental entity or being a governmental entity. So a branch was an easy option for an entity because it's an extension. It's not a separate legal entity. In Madagascar, the branch option is available, but it's only available to a non-governmental organization. And at least as of today, based on a preliminary analysis, we're thinking the position taken by Madagascar government is that a state university, because a state university, is likely not considered as an NGO. In terms of language, English is used fluently as a business language. In Fiji and Philippines, all our application documents and everything was submitted in English. In Madagascar, because it's the French civil law that we follow, French is used fluently as business language. All submitted application documents must be submitted in French. All English documents must be translated to French. It sometimes increases the cost and resources, but again, that is the cost of doing business internationally. We've seen this in other countries also, where English is not the business language, China being one example. So this is pretty normal in the course of international transactions, that you may be dealing with a country that does not follow English for the purposes of their submissions and also for the purposes of doing business there. Timeline. In Fiji and Philippines, it was pretty predictable. Entities could be set up within few weeks upon submission of the application. So there was some kind of a clarity and consistency in terms of timeline. In Madagascar, we see it's a little unpredictable. As you see, there are approvals required of Ministries of Interior, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. When there are multiple ministries involved in the approval, the timeline could take more than what we are used to, that we saw in Fiji and Philippines, and could be up to 1 year. But the CRC has a plan in place how to do projects in the meantime while we are trying to create an entity, even though if it takes 6 months or 1 year. Law and policies in Fiji and Philippines, there were clear interpretation and implementation of laws, prompt collaborations with the government entities. In Madagascar, we do see to some extent some lack of fair and consistent implementation of law and policy. A good example I gave you was what is considered a non-governmental organization versus what is not a non-governmental organization. So there's obviously some kind of lack of interpretation of law or policies, and it's sometimes very difficult for us to have the government authorities that we're dealing with to think out of the box or come up with innovative models to work with companies who are making investment in that countries. We've also seen that foreign companies may be subject to additional tax scrutiny, so it's very important to make sure that there are proper tax compliances in place so that there's not undue exposure to any tax scrutiny. Corruption, we had already spoken about this. I told you about the transparency index. Fiji is ranked 49 of the 180 countries, so this is a higher ranking. 49 is better. And Fiji is one of the highest scoring Pacific country, having a national anti-corruption agency. But having said that, Philippines does not have a higher ranking. Philippines is actually ranked 116 out of 180 countries, so they are like 100 plus. So anything above 100 is pretty much high rankings, which says that that country is more conducive to corruption. Similarly, like Madagascar, which is a little bit more higher than Philippines, that's 142 out of 180 countries. So obviously, corruption is prevalent in that country. Again, nothing out of the ordinary with respect to doing business in some countries. The key is how to mitigate some of those risks. Did U.S. companies do cite corruption as one of the biggest issues in doing business internationally per se? Madagascar is just one example of it. Next slide, please.
Vanita, before you move on to the next slide, I believe Matt Lenz has his hand raised and has a question. Matt? You're on mute, Matt.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah, I had a question, and it relates to what you were just talking about. And earlier in the presentation, one of the project goals and strategic areas is to improve strategic area number 3, improve national, regional, local level governance, advocacy, and anti-corruption efforts around natural resource management. I got to tell you, I'm a little bit concerned about that because I was doing some research before this presentation, this meeting, and Madagascar has been known to jail and arrest activists and advocacy folks around the natural resource areas. So I'm just have folks given thought to just that situation in Madagascar? Is very unstable. There's an election coming up that looks to be unstable. It's one of the poorest countries in the world. And they have that redwood, or that, I forget what tree it is, big logging corruption thing in the environment. So I'm very concerned about that.
I guess Elin can speak to that. Elin?
I'm going to ask Sarah, who's the principal investigator, to answer that
Sure.
question.
Hi, everybody. Sarah Gaines, I'm the PI on this proposal. And I guess just to put this in context, we've been working in Madagascar for the past 5-6 years now. First as a sub-award on another major USAID project, and then most recently on a UN Development Program Ocean Innovation Challenge. So I've been in Madagascar, I believe, 10 times over the past 5 years. I am French speaking. I was previously in France working for the UN before I came to URI. So it certainly is helpful to speak French when you're working in country. I can say, related to the issue of transparency, Matt, you're exactly right. It is an issue, and it's part of the reason, to this work focused on, in this case, IUU fishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And that's an area we've worked around the world. We do it now in the Philippines, which is a very contentious issue. We've previously worked in Senegal, another French-speaking country, extensively on this illegal fishing issues. So I guess just to respond and maybe assuage your concern a little bit, it's something we have been working on over the past 5 years. It is a concern that needs addressing. And I think the point also about working in Madagascar, it's an incredibly biodiverse, inspiring place. There's research that's shown the value of protecting terrestrial space in Madagascar is higher than any other place in the world because of the endemicism of species. It's more valuable to protect 1 acre land in Madagascar than anywhere else in the world. And so it could apply some similar approaches to coastal and marine settings. So it's a very high priority to work in this area. Recognize that corruption is an issue. We have been working there now for years, and we've been careful. We haven't had any problems. Work with lots of local partners. We work very closely with the government. So we have experience working in this area, and we have been careful. We haven't had problems. We've done this work on illegal fishing around the world. So I don't know if Elin, you'd like to share examples from other projects, but we have a lot of experience working on this transparency issue in fisheries.
Well, I would just to add, so in the Philippines, where we work in the South China Sea, really in the area where it's very contentious between the Philippines and China, we get a lot of guidance also from our USAID partners. We had an expedition out to an island area to do some sort of communications outreach on IUU fishing, and the US government, they decided that this is not secure, and they, told us that's, even though this was an activity they had requested, then they walked back on it, said, no, this is not a safe activity, let's rethink this. So I think it's something that we are aware of, and we do take care, I would say.
Yeah, and if I may add, just from an outside perspective, I think the case that you were talking about actually happened in 2017 when an activist was actually arrested. An environmental activist was actually arrested. But then once that activist was arrested, there was obviously globally, including the Amnesty International group, took up for that activist as such. But long story short, since 2017, there has been pressure from foreign agencies like the Amnesty International, USAID, and others to make sure that the Madagascar government doesn't put unnecessary charges and try to suppress what we call freedom of press or freedom of activism and so on. One thing they are working on, and it's not in place yet, is a lot of these countries in the Africa Union are being pressurized. I won't say pressurized, are being requested and asked to sign there's an anti-corruption convention, which actually there are multiple countries all over the world who signed that convention and then promise to follow the obligations and the terms and conditions of the convention. And Madagascar is actually now on the table talking about this convention, looking at what the convention is asking them if they want to be a signatory to that convention, and they have to have better stringent policies, anti-corruption policies. So I think from 2017 to 2023, there has been definitely advancement towards, making sure that they do curb corruption in that country, and they obviously there's better freedom in terms of activism and all. Obviously not big strides, but small strides, which is obviously a positive sign. I never went back and looked at what is the ranking for Madagascar. Maybe Elin or Sarah know better than I do. But when I look at 2022, they're at 42. I am pretty sure if I look at 2020 or 2019 in terms of ranking, they must have been 149 or 154. Every time they improve their ranking, the World Bank and the Transparency International look at all factors to give you a better ranking, and it's an annual process they follow. So if they're doing better in rankings every year, that is a good sign. If they start progressing to worse rankings, that is a bad sign. That's the way I would look at risk analysis. That is there progress happening in that country? Not a best answer, but something to look at.
Thanks for that. So just to kind of close the loop on this, folks who are in the room and have worked in Madagascar, you feel comfortable that that employees will be safe and that our resources will be protected. Is that what I'm gathering?
Yes, I think we have the right framework in place in discussing with Nita and the legal team here. We have strong partnerships with USAID in country. We have strong partnerships with our sub-awards and strong processes that we use here for the history of setting up these international projects around the world.
I would also add to that, I don't think we would be considered activists by the people that we work with in Madagascar. Our work is not sort of a Greenpeace type of activism. We take a very participatory approach, working with local government, with the local universities, other partners, with communities. So I think that our risk that we would be arrested in the way that it happened in 2017 is basically non-existent.
Okay, we have 20 minutes to get through the remainder of our discussion and action items and an executive session. So I'll ask if we could.
Yes, this was my last slide actually, Robbie. Just to just piggybacking on the question that Matt mentioned, there are some tools that have been discussed and we are talking about, which will be put into place to mitigate liabilities, such as get proper insurance to cover all aspects of the appropriate branch operational model, and then engage third-party service providers. That could be payroll services, HR compliance, legal, accounting, who are basically then make sure that proper compliances are followed by bringing in those resources to help the CRC team. And as Elin said, a team that comprises of people who are well versed with cultural processes, local business practices, like somebody like Sarah, who understands what it means to undertake a USAID grant operation in Madagascar. These are all tools efficient and effective tools that help to mitigate some of the liabilities that we're talking about. Next slide, which is the last slide. And then obviously undertake anti-corruption training by program participants, consultant agents, third parties, which is done globally in every way. You just do proper training programs. You make your local people understand that as a U.S. university, you're governed by the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, the FCPA. So that training helps to mitigate some of those liabilities, and implement URI's code of conduct, internal controls, ethics and compliance, all of that for your program participants with the objective of to prevent bribery or any other concerns, which actually the CRC team has been doing that in the past. You know, they've done that for Philippines, they've done it for Fiji, and they will continue to do that for Madagascar. That's it from me. I don't know if there's time for another question or so. Otherwise, please get in touch with the legal team if you all have any specific questions that you would like us to answer.
Thank you, Vanita. And I do have a question. This is more so for the board. I'm supposed to pass a motion that for the board to approve the establishment and registration of a branch for this effort. But if I'm not mistaken, and maybe I misunderstood, there was a Rhode Island legislation, I believe it was 7A, that specifically prohibits us from doing so. Did I misunderstand that, or?
Robbie, I can speak to that. We did modify this resolution specifically to not provide for the formation of another legal entity in Madagascar. We do believe if we got to that point, we would have to do that legal analysis and come back to the board. So the resolution simply authorizes the formation of a branch, which we think is permissible, or another operational structure, but not the organization of another legal entity.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alyssa.
And I think somebody has their hand up. I don't know if that's a question. I think it's Brittany. No.
Bethany.
Bethany,
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you, Robbie. Appreciate it. I just wanted to add my support in terms of the mission of the Coastal Resources Center and this international research portfolio. There's a lot of deep experience here, and this is the kind of work we want to do, and we want to figure out ways to do this both safely and responsibly, and have the mechanisms by which to do so. You know, one potential, I think, avenue that's being explored is we do have our University of Rhode Island Research Foundation, which is a 401c3. So there could be some mechanisms there as well that could help in this, but we want to be able to enter into the appropriate agreements.
Thank you. It should be noted, this item is also being presented as a discussion item to the Academic Affairs and Research Committee on September 14th, so tomorrow. Any additional questions? Yeah. May I have a motion that the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee recommend that the Board of Trustees approves the full resolution set forth in the enclosure, through which the board, in summary, is approving the establishment and registration of a branch or other appropriate model under the laws of the Republic of Madagascar in the name of the University of Rhode Island or such other appropriate name, and authorizes the president of the University of Rhode Island, Dr. Mark Parlange, or his designates, to undertake the execution and submission of all documents, instruments, applications, authorizations, and designations that may be required by the applicable governmental authorities and agencies in the Republic of Madagascar, and to take any and all other actions necessary and or appropriate for the establishment, registration, and operations of a branch and or other appropriate operational model under the laws of the Republic of Madagascar, and for the efficient and effective conduct of the USAID Resilient, Inclusive, Abundance, and Key Ecosystems, RIAC, Madagascar program, under the leadership and direction of the university's Coastal Resources Center as presented.
Matt Lenz, I'll move it.
Is there a second to the motion? Is there a second? Joe,
For McCullough, I'll second him.
any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, say yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Did
It's unan-
Armin vote yes? I'm sorry, I didn't hear a vote.
You know what, I'm gonna get back on you. He's not on the committee, he's an invited guest.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
I voted yes as well.
Got it, thank you.
Motion passes. The next item on the agenda is item 4, executive session.
I move that we go into executive session.
May I have a motion that the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee of the URI Board of Trustees convene into executive session pursuant to Rhode Island RIGL 42465A2 for discussion regarding potential litigation and pending litigation, specifically the Burton Thompson consolidated case against the University of Rhode Island and the Louis Kwame Fosu case against the University of Rhode Island.
Matt Lenz, so moved.
Is there a second?
Formicola, second.
Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. The committee will now convene into executive session for the reasons specified. It is anticipated that the executive session will last approximately 20 minutes, after which the committee will reconvene in open session. The live stream will be paused during the executive session and will resume once executive session is ended and the committee reconvenes in open session. And for those committee members participating via WebEx, please confirm by saying yes that no other person is present and or able to hear executive session discussion at the remote location. Yes for me.
Yes, for Matt Lenz.
Yes.
Yes,
for
Joe
Joe.
Formicola.
Yes, for
Yes,
Rachel.
for me too.
Okay. If you do not automatically move into the breakout session, join the session when prompted on your computer screen by clicking on the Join Now button. Remote attendees not participating in the executive session discussion will be moved into the lobby.
Bethany. How are you? I think everybody else jumped off.
Yeah, I might just, I don't have, I'm not
I
on
don't
this
think I'm
committee,
needed
so
anymore.
might
Yeah,
just
I have a
leave you.
3:30 too. I just figured I'd say hi since it was just you
Nice
and
to
I.
see you.
Good to see you too.
A lot with these agreements. I think my head is just going around. If we
Exploding.
can't set this up as a branch, I
Yeah.
don't know how the hell we're gonna manage it financially, but that wasn't something that,
How is you have your new hire, Elizabeth? Oh. Okay, right.
this might be public.
Oh. Right.
So I mean, I'm gonna leave.
Yeah, yeah. See ya.
We're live. We're live. I think we're all muted.
Robbie, I think it muted you when.
Everybody's muted.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
All
thanks.
right, I was on a roll there. All right. The Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee of the University of Rhode Island Board of Trustees is now convened in open session. The first order of business in open session is a motion to seal the executive session minutes. May I have a motion that the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee of the URI Board of Trustees seal the minutes of the executive session?
Matt Len, so moved.
There's
Joe
a second.
Formicola, second.
Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is item 5, and that's a motion to adjourn. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Matt Len, so moved.
Is there a second to the motion?
Joe Formicola, second.
Any discussions? If there being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Our next upcoming meeting is scheduled for October 23rd. We'll provide specific dates as the date approaches. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Robbie.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.